the UN calling for an investigation into human rights violations, and Amnesty International calling for prosecutions. Yet, not one body has been exhumed.
All right, let's start off with the thing that Lauren Southern likes to skip over, because it's probably something really important that every single one of you should know, and that I guess she likes to either forget. I doubt she's unaware of this. She has to know this. Anyways, the investigation into that first mass gravesite, the one where they found the 215 children, that investigation, the reason they chose that site was because they found child's remains. That was the purpose. They weren't just randomly searching an area of ground. A child's rib bone was found, and that's what provoked the investigation into that area. They have already found children's remains. Lauren, you absolute ghoul. How much do you need? How many rib bones do you need from kids before you can consider this might be something that actually happened? You always gloss over that fact. It seems like a really important thing. Why would you skip over that unless you're trying to paint a narrative, which again, I would say is tantamount to modern day genocide denial. That's what's going on here. But you never hear her say that. That should be something that you bring up right away. This isn't as juicy as I'm sure some of you want this drama to be. It's more just this never-ending cycle. So I did a couple segments last week on Lauren Southern, talking about how Lauren Southern is now demanding that the bodies get exhumed in Canada. Of course, these are the children who were forcibly put in residential schools, and the discovery of numerous unmarked graves in Canada. There's multiple different findings that have taken place in Canada, and the one that most people usually concentrate on is the Kamloops one, and the 215 kids that ground penetrating radar has suggested are currently buried there. Lauren Southern has for a while been trying to say that the entire thing is a hoax and that she won't believe a single word of it until the bodies themselves have been exhumed, so to speak. Now, this has been obviously a point of contention between myself and a lot of other creators on the internet, and it's one of the things that I still get a lot of pushback from, and this time it came in the form of both her and Destiny collaborating together. So Destiny ended up quote tweeting the original tweet that I had made on Lauren Southern, talking about how Lauren Southern specifically, as well as the far right links that she's using for her new video, which is the "Not One Body Found in Canadian quote Mass Graves" video, they never mentioned the fact that the investigation itself was done in part because, well, in large part because there was already the discovery of children's remains in that area, specifically a child's rib bone. And that's usually omitted for a reason. It kind of doesn't really help the entire thing is a hoax narrative if you start mentioning that they originally did the investigation into that area because of that. So some of the things that I was pointing out. But I guess going after Lauren Southern got Destiny upset and said, wait, why did you type so much random shit and not refute anything that was said? Have any bodies been found? Question mark. Can you link to info about it? Or are you going to continue to profit off dead native children without ever even doing the minimum amount of due diligence with your posting? Which, again, I was kind of surprised that Destiny had found a way to be more callous than Lauren Southern in this regard. But at either rate, the two of them saying, where are the bodies? Why haven't we seen the bodies? When are the bodies going to be found? I guess this whole thing put it into perspective for me, because now I'm starting to understand why exactly, and probably counterpoints is going to be, I'd say, the most rational actor in all of this, why they are specifically upset about this. Lauren Southern is really upset about this because Lauren Southern, I suppose, the idea of this suddenly getting into very mainstream focus, as in both the eyes of Canada and the eyes of the world last year, started for the first time to realize the horrors and atrocities of the residential school system. And it was based, of course, on these findings, because these were making international headlines and worldwide news, and the subsequent destruction that was happening to Catholic churches, which they've directly associated with each other, being that the Catholic churches are burning down because people are outraged, morally outraged at what they think is happening. Now, the reason I was having a lot of trouble trying to process this, and one of the reasons why I think one of the worst things I could have done in that debate was kind of come from a perspective like, hey, did you not realize this? The disconnect is coming from the fact that I think Lauren Southern, perhaps Destiny, I don't know, or Counterpoints, or a lot of people around the world, for them, this was the first time that they had learned maybe a lot about the residential school system of Canada, where it wasn't for me. Both because, I've grown up with an Indigenous mother who had obviously spoken a lot about these kind of issues, as well as it was something that I started doing my own research into later in my life. So for me, the outrage wasn't really something that I considered to be unfounded. even with a lack of quote-unquote dead children's bones. To me, it was kind of more of a reckoning. It felt more as if this was the first time both Canada and the world at large were starting to realize the horrors and atrocities that happened to residential school children and Indigenous people in this country, specifically because the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which again interviewed thousands and thousands of survivors firsthand, really put into focus how atrocious this was, this process, both from being separated from your parents forcibly to being in these institutions where, again, many of them were sexually tortured, many of them were physically abused, many of them died trying to escape the schools or by suicide, stuff of this nature. This was all stuff that I was already pretty well aware of. And then now it happened that this kind of information was being put into the larger culture, as it were. And I think that's where the disconnect comes from. And that's why someone like Lauren Southern is particularly offended by the concept of, why don't you have these bodies exhumed immediately? Because I want to see them to prove that this in fact happened. It's like Counterpoint said in that debate, where he was like, when I hear the term mass graves, I think, like, the idea that they were lining these kids up along a wall and then like shooting them or something and then dumping into graves, that's what it gets into my head. So that's why I feel that perhaps the language is too heavy, or the debate between whether or not this should be known as a quote-unquote mass grave or any of that. And to me, I was having a very hard time realizing, or at least bridging that gap to the point where I was like, well, yeah, maybe this was the first time that a lot of this was in the public conscious. In terms of, like, the best thing you could say is not where are the bodies. It would be that they haven't actually started exhuming bodies yet. You could I guess, do outrage at that, which in this case, I guess, Destiny and Lauren Southern are, being that it has been, 7 months since these discoveries. Why, after 7 months, have they not begun exhuming the bodies? The answer to that is very complicated, both because in each one of these situations, some of them are ongoing investigations. This is something about whether or not they have to get permission from the bands themselves as to whether or not they're going to exhume. In some instances, they are planning on exhuming the bodies, but that, again, is not a process that happens immediately. The thing is, what occurred in Canada in terms of the residential school system, and what I would say is moral outrage, which is justified if you are just learning about the residential school system for the first time, is not something that requires the presentation of a whole bunch of children's cadavers in order to prove. Because, again, what occurred there, we do have the testimony of thousands of survivors who still are alive to this day. So the horrors and atrocities that happen to Indigenous people, that to me, I've already kind of accepted as a given, whereas they are coming in from a perspective as, you should not be as morally outraged of this until you again present me with findings in this regard. The same thing, again, was happening with people like the Quartering, for example. The Quartering also said something very similar, like, a single tooth and a rib bone proves a genocide took place, the Serfs. No, not at all. The accusations of cultural genocide, that was established with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And again, it's something that is, I guess, more broadly accepted, maybe within Canada, within certain circles. Not within conservative circles, clearly, but, even within liberal circles itself, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has publicly stated that this was a cultural genocide and that it is an ongoing process. And that's why there were many calls to action presented by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. One of those calls to action was in fact that there had to be more investigation into the potential the potential of there being perhaps missing children. What happened to the children? Is there children buried in certain locations? It's going to be one of those things, unfortunately, that is going to be, I think, very upsetting to people who are just waiting to see bodies be exhumed immediately. In that, like, there is no time frame on this as it is right now. There is a lot of discussion as to certain projects getting funding either from the federal government to help identify people or whether or not people want to exhume certain sites, and that is not something that I'm ever going to have a say in it. Neither is anyone else, I guess, observing this from the sidelines. So I guess this cycle of outrage at this is just going to continue for the short term. And that's about as far as it can go when it comes to this. But yeah, if it's something that that deeply troubles you and it's something you want to learn more about, I would honestly recommend reading up on, or even reading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings themselves, the calls to action, the witness testimonies. All of that is publicly available. It's all available on the internet. Simple 2-second Google search can find that. In regards to the Destiny/Lawrence Southern alliance, I'm going to say the same thing that I've been saying before, in that I do not understand to this point why Destiny, someone who is renowned for, again, seeking the facts behind things, not listening to simply what people say or listening to their feelings, is still accepting a lot of what Lawrence Southern has been saying on the surface. I mean, I would even propose a challenge, and this is something that would be very easy to do. If Destiny wants, I would challenge him to watch, and this is an individual who I know he doesn't like, Hayes Vadim. Watch Hayes Vadim's recent video on Lawrence Southern and the Christchurch shooting, and all the things that she has been saying to both you, Booksmarts, multiple people in your community about, either her propagation of the Great Replacement Theory, her lack of explaining her close ties to the individual Martin Sellner, the donations that were made directly from the Christchurch shooter to different entities, and including her time with Stefan Molyneux, stuff like that. Debunk that. Debunk it in real time. Debunk it live on a stream. It's something that you would be able to debunk both Vadim, because again, I know that there's no love lost there, but debunk the entire thing. With cited sources, and come back to me. I'll take the debunking, and if you're capable of proving that Lawrence Southern was in fact telling the truth, and that it is in fact Vadim who has lied, I will do the one thing I know everyone has wanted me to do in that community. I will chug soy. I will chug a full glass of soy milk live on stream. I will become the soy boy. I will soy live on camera. So if you would like to watch that, if you'd like to watch me chugging a full glass of soy on stream, then all you have to do is debunk the claims that were put forth in Vadim's latest video about Lawrence Southern, and prove Lawrence Southern is in fact completely telling the truth, and that it was him who was lying. Then yes, I will do what everyone has always wanted. I will soy. I will soy. I will chug a glass of soy, and there you have it. That's all I can really say on that. And in the interim, again, if people think that outrage over what happened to Indigenous people in Canada is unfounded, I would again recommend that you all please go read or study the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or look at the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Report, both of whom paint a horrifyingly harrowing picture of what was taking place and it continues to take place in this country in regards to all that. And hey, here's an olive branch in terms of all this. While we don't know who exactly has been burning down churches, in the event that it is, white anarchists or whatever they want to be labeled as, or Antifa members, or people who were just like, oh my God, how could this happen? Because they too, in turn, may have learned for the first time about the horrors of the residential school system through this entire process. If it is in fact them, then yes, I would say emphatically, don't do that. You are not helping anyone if you are a white anarchist and you're burning down churches because you think you're part of like some great rebellion. And a lot of these instances, the churches that were being burnt down were ones in which Indigenous people either attended and or were deeply upset that the church in their community burnt down. So if it turns out that that was in fact, or those are the guilty parties of people who have been burning down the churches, then yes, I don't know what the fuck you're doing, but you're not helping the material conditions of Indigenous people who actually suffered through this process by doing it. And in turn, you're actually bringing attention towards, maybe a negative aspect of this entire story. So that's all I got to say about that. What'll it take for Lance to say, drink this full glass of soy? Oh, soy sauce? If I drink a full glass of soy sauce, wouldn't that like give me more sodium than a human being should consume in a day? Wouldn't I get seriously hurt through that process? Yeah, but anyways, if that is what, quote, white allies are doing, because we don't know who are burning down the churches, you are not helping the situation in any way, shape, or form. If that's the case, that's my thought on the whole thing. Also, a relatively new article in Vox was pretty good. Want to know how to save nature? Ask Indigenous scientists. Victor Manuel Hernandez believes he wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for the banana tree. As a 14-year-old resistance fighter during the Civil War in 1970s El Salvador, he hid beneath the tree's lush green fronds when the military attacked his encampment. He'd been shot and a bomb fell directly overhead, but as he recalls, the bomb landed in the leaves of the banana tree, which he believes prevented them from igniting, shielding him from death. I mean, if that is true, that's wild. After the attack ended, he mustered the strength to break off a branch of the tree, which he used as a crutch to walk to his neighboring Guatemala to find help. Nature not only protected me, he recounts, it saved my life. Nature protects us as long as we protect nature, writes Hernandez. I mean, that's like a literal story of it happening. Who is now a 31-year-old postdoctorate researcher at the University of Washington. Ancestral knowledge has been sustained in our communities. It's a valid form of knowledge that isn't necessarily validated through Western ways, like publication and books. Indigenous peoples and local communities steward far more of the planet than protecting areas like national parks. Around 80% of the diversity of species known to be living on Earth are found in lands owned or managed by these groups. That's despite centuries of genocide, racism, and what Hernandez and other academics and activists refer to as settler colonialism. I know it's a naughty term on the internet. These intentional displacements and erasure of indigenous peoples by outsiders. Conservation continues to teach scientists that scientific knowledge is more valuable than indigenous knowledge. This attitude ignores a staggering variety of insights as indigenous communities, from medicinal knowledge of plants and animals in the Amazon to coral reef conservation in Australia to the prescribed breeding practices in the West. I recently spoke with Hernandez about the potential for indigenous science to shift how we think about and carry out conservation. If you haven't checked it out, this is a really good article. I'll send it to you to read in full, should you be so inclined. It's an interesting read, though, and talks a lot about indigenous conservation and how a lot of indigenous groups are, in fact, working to protect the planet. Oof, this one brings me no pleasure, but it's something I got to talk about. It's obviously a topic I feel pretty passionate about. It's something I take quite seriously. And what actually reminded me that this was taking place was yesterday when I was just browsing the Twitch platform, looking to see what streams were going down. I happened to come across this one. So this was yesterday. It's since been deleted. My idea was that I was going to be kind of just breaking this down in real time and picking apart all the arguments. But Lauren Southern Live on Twitch, by the way, Canadian mass graves investigation, once again, doing full-on genocide denial. The kind of shit, you know, in the modern age, which I guess is socially acceptable because it involves indigenous people, so she feels okay doing it. But had she been doing it for other groups, would be considered absolutely deplorable and would be completely beyond the pale. For someone to not only have a streaming career on this platform, but to use it to talk about this kind of hate speech. And then you can just see the kind of comments that were popping up in her chat as well. This is Lois, it's like 300 scientists saying the jab is okay, like all of them have PhDs in nonsense. When was Truth and Reconciliation established? Because Microsoft might want to sue. Is this like Bill Nye the Engineer guy? Truth and Reconciliation is another money grab. People want truth. It's not about disproving it one way or another. It's about learning the truth. Truth and Reconciliation is a Marxist fake history tribunal. Cool. So anyways, I was taken aback and kind of disgusted and wondering what the fuck was happening. Turns out Lauren Southern has also put out a new video called Not One Body Found in Canadian Mass Graves. I gotta say this right out of the bat. She wants children's bones. Lauren Southern effectively wants kids' bones. She wants to have a whole pile of bones, and then she can say, well, maybe this was an atrocity that happened in Canada. Maybe then, if we can get her just the right amount. I don't know how many child's bones she needs, though. I don't know what the quota is. I don't know if Lauren Southern, it's like once you reach this many dead kids' bones, she'll be like, oh, okay, so that actually was a pretty bad thing, the whole residential school system, which she's already acknowledged, by the way. She's already acknowledged that it was a horrifying thing. But anyways, if you haven't watched Lauren Southern's horrifying documentary, where she completely misunderstands how GPR technology works, the whole ethos of her body of work is that the discovery of children in Canada and the unmarked graves of multiple children in different residential schools or near residential schools in Canada is part of a massive hoax. She's calling the whole thing a hoax set up for political gain. It's one of her theories, as well as a variety of other things. And the crux of it lies upon the fact that she doesn't think ground-penetrating radar is capable of finding human remains, finding human bodies. If you want to watch my response to that and debunking of it, in which I actually spoke to experts in the field, something that she claimed she would do, but she never did, but I did speak to people who are GPR technicians and stuff. Outside of that, she's, I guess, coming to this new conclusion. I'm going to guess, I haven't watched this video yet, but I'm going to guess the ethos of it is going to be targeting specifically maybe it has something to do with a new article.
Clean up your room.
A couple days ago, an article came out, and I think it was an op-ed. I don't want to be sure about that, but I believe it was an op-ed written by a pretty prominent conservative, and I'm going to guess this is probably either that or the post-millennial article is what she's now thought was appropriate to talk about these issues with. So Barbara Kay puts out this article. I already ripped into it a couple days ago. Barbara Kay, what we don't know about the unmarked graves at residential schools. And, over the past month, 3 noteworthy events have presented as provocative grist amongst the growing mill of Indigenous settler relations. Acclaimed Cree playwright and novelist Thompson Highway's memoir, Permanent Astonishment, was published by Penguin Random House. Highway's experiences as a residential school did not embitter him. On the contrary, he credited the 9-year stint for the foundational skills that led to the creation of self-realization. This is a super fucked up thing to start your article with, and also very fucked up for the National Post, even though they're a right-wing publication, to have published this. This is basically saying, and if you're unfamiliar, the residential school system in Canada was a program in which Indigenous kids were forcibly taken from their families directly out of their mother's arms and put into these institutions where they would have to unlearn everything that made them Indigenous. So they would have to unlearn their language, they would have to unlearn any kind of spirituality that they had gotten, they would have to learn proper English or French, and that they would be taught in a variety of ways to remove the Indian within, to kill the Indian within was kind of the actual verbiage that they wrote them. And at these schools, they were also systemically tortured, raped, abused, and murdered. So it's just like, it's a horrifying part of Canadian history. It's something that I had spoken about a lot because, growing up with an Indigenous mother, she'd made me very aware of these kind of things. But I was speaking about it before this whole thing kind of blew up, because it was something that I was trying to teach my audience about if they didn't know, because Canada's always got this kind of glossy, beautiful, panacea, wonderful country kind of an idea. And I was like, well, we actually have horrifying things in both our past and present that need attention being called to. But this is someone saying that, hey, here's an example of someone who grew up in that system and said that it actually helped them become more resilient, as in the torture that you experienced in the system and or just the hardship that you experienced, even if you weren't tortured, led to you becoming an incredible playwright. Which, just again, think on the surface, if that was done for something else. Think if someone came out of, say, I don't know, the Holocaust, and afterwards was like, yeah, it was a horrible experience, but it did lead me to being inspired enough to write a really good novel, or it led me being inspired enough to do something very, very creative. You would never do that. Like, even like the idea of formulating that kind of an argument would be seen as just outrageously beyond the pale. And yet it is the first paragraph in this article. But I'm going to guess this might be something that she's going to be referencing in this. I'm not entirely sure. We'll see.
It's been 7 months now since the Indigenous mass grave story broke, and not one body has been exhumed. Not one. 7 months. Flags at half-mast, thousands of articles, promises of investigation, an entire national holiday created, Canada Day cancelled, protests in the streets, $27 million allocated to locating and memorializing these graves, dozens of churches burnt to the ground forever and vandalized, the UN calling for an investigation into human rights violations, and Amnesty International calling for prosecutions. Yet, not one body has been exhumed.
Holy fuck. All right, let's start off with the thing that Lauren Southern likes to skip over, because it's probably something really important that every single one of you should know, and that I guess she likes to either forget. I doubt she's unaware of this. She has to know this. Anyways, the investigation into that first mass gravesite, the one where they found the 215 children, that investigation, the reason they chose that site was because they found child's remains. That was the purpose. They weren't just randomly searching an area of ground. A child's rib bone was found, and that's what provoked the investigation into that area. They have already found children's remains. Lauren, you absolute fucking ghoul. How much do you need? How many rib bones do you need from kids before you can consider this might be something that actually happened? You always gloss over that fact. It seems like a really important thing. Why would you skip over that unless you're trying to paint a narrative, which again, I would say is tantamount to modern day genocide denial. That's what's going on here. But you never hear her say that. That should be something that you bring up right away. Hey, if I do an easy Google search, let's see, The finding of a child's rib bone that surfaced near a former apple orchard helped researchers find an unmarked graveyard containing hundreds of remains. That's what ground-penetrating radar specialist Dr. Sarah Bollier said Thursday. On May 27th, Chief Roseanne Casimir announced 215 graves had been found and located on the grounds of the former Kamloops Residential School. She said the discovery was made using ground-penetrating radar. Now, when I spoke to a variety of experts on this, including people who work directly with investigations using ground-penetrating radar specifically, and this is something that I'm almost afraid to say because I'm worried that Lauren is going to weaponize it. Not a single one of them that I spoke to, not one, was capable of saying that they thought this entire thing, or even would entertain the idea that this was a hoax. At best, one of them was like, no, it's absolutely flabbergasting to me that someone would want to claim that this is a hoax when these techniques are used frequently in order to, investigate grave sites. He's like, at best, you might be able to claim that that number could not be 100% accurate until bodies are exhumed. So the idea that 215 specific grave sites had been found, that might be something that could turn out to be, instead it's a matter of 200 bodies have been found rather than 215. But that is the most that we could grant you in regards to this. Otherwise, just stating that the entire thing is an outright fabrication, considering the investigation itself was provoked based on the discovery of child's remains, is just absolutely ludicrous. And in the case of Lauren Southern, like it's deeply, deeply disturbing.
And yes, I would like to think, based off of all of the impacts I have just listed, we can all agree that confirmation of this story does matter. It matters if the burials are maybe burials or actual real burials, and it is worthwhile to ask why, after all of this attention, money, political interest, and time, there has been no action taken. Well, at last...
So again, action taken is what Lauren Southern is referring to, I assume, is just digging up bodies. That's what she wants in terms of action taken. The thing that's really fucked up about this is, again, this wasn't like a new story to Indigenous communities. They've known about this for a while. There are thousands upon thousands of testimonies, as well as living survivors today, people who can tell you firsthand, yeah, this is what happened to me in these schools. I was tortured. I was sexually abused. There are thousands of cases of that. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission interviewed thousands of survivors. The thing is, like, it's not a matter of whether or not this happened, right? Lauren Southern wants to have her pile of baby bones. She wants her pile of bodies to be able to justify what she considers outrage over this. The outrage over this happens to do with a lot of the fact that a lot of people were unaware of this. Like when you polled Canadians, the majority of Canadians, I think 2/3 were like, I was unaware of residential schools until these stories started coming out. The rest of the world, when this made international news, all of a sudden were like, holy fuck, that's fucked up. Canada, what the hell? Like this, but again, to Lauren Southern, it's like, this was new news, I guess, apparently. This was a new phenomenon to her. And now that it's being come out, she's like, well, we have to immediately exhume every one of those bodies, because otherwise I don't believe a single word of it. I need to see my bones. I need my baby bones.
We may have some sort of explanation. Why? Last week, retired professor, I am going to pronounce his name wrong, Jacques Rouillard. Oh my god, I cannot do French names. Jacques Rouillard. Jacques Rouillard.
Oh God, I don't care, just get to the bigotry.
Is a highly distinguished academic in his field with an expertise in Canadian history.
I love when she does the thing where she films herself doing research and she puts on her research face. This is research, Lauren, by the way. It's always free. And in her really shitty movies and documentaries, she'll often have like a couple cutaways to like her, again, doing research. It's always the same. It's like,
particularly the 19th and 20th century. I mean, so often you will get into these arguments online on Twitter, or you'll see a mainstream media article where someone is claiming to be a doctor in their profile ranting at you about how obesity doesn't exist or some shit. And then you look them up and you find out they've actually got a PhD in Buffy studies or something, which it exists. Don't ask me how I know this, but anyways, it's just
no, more research face. Or no, that one's reaction face. Sorry. The TRC asked for funds to look for graves. It wasn't until this year the government has committed funds. Yes. And hey, you probably already know this. My conclusion to all of this conversation would be, why is there a time frame to you? Why is it to you that you're like, I need to now know how many bodies were under there. I need to now see all the bones in the bodies. I want them now. This has to happen now. Who the fuck are you, Lauren Southern, to ask Indigenous communities, who, by the way, are already undergoing an immense amount of trauma from having all these stories come to light, from the questioning that is coming from all this. Who are you to demand now that every single one of these bodies be exhumed? Wouldn't that fall upon the families? Wouldn't that fall upon the communities, whether or not they want them to be exhumed, when they want to be exhumed? I have read that there are certain, there is now now government funding that is going in towards the exhumation of certain grave sites. That is going to take place and time about when they determine that. That is not me to decide when that happens. And until that does happen, again, because you keep saying this is a very difficult thing to talk about, it's just such a heated topic. Well, then why are you already saying that the whole thing is a mass hoax before you have the evidence you keep asking for? You keep saying we don't know what's happening until we dig up the bodies. Okay, then why the fuck are you talking about it? Why the fuck are you making videos about it then? Why the fuck have you made a video called The Great Mass Graves Hoax of Canada? Because again, if that's what you're waiting for, why not wait for it? That would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it?
Nice to, for once, at last, have someone who actually knows what they are talking about write an article on a subject and actually have it get shares. Unsurprisingly, the man started by opening his essay aghast at how the media and public decided to react to what is an unconfirmed preliminary report. Who would have thought an academic would want a bit of skepticism?
Okay, I'm loving all this. Anyways, the reason why there was a variety of media outlets that took this story on, outside of the fact that these were, again, pretty credible anthropologists who were doing the investigations themselves, was that this is not a secret, was that this is not news. It's not like all of a sudden, based on these discoveries, they now understand that residential schools existed, that they tortured and sexually abused kids, and that children died in them. None of that is new. We already know that, because we have thousands of survivors alive today who went to the schools. This isn't a revelation. I understand it might be for conservatives or far-right conservatives now who are just like, well, I hadn't heard of this. I didn't know that, the Catholic Church was doing such things. Why blame the Catholic Church? Why don't we, but wait. We haven't exhumed the body, so technically, we don't know if these are even mass graves at all. I mean, these could be different. Oh, and there's different situations. In this environment, for example, they weren't mass graves, and no one actually said that they were mass graves in this one, but they were unmarked graves. And then maybe that the tombstones themselves are bulldozed. Well, I'm just going to lump them all into one giant tapestry of a hoax. I'm going to say the whole thing was made up.
And caution when approaching such a subject, but let's get into it. After 7 months of recrimination and denunciation, where are the remains of the children buried at the Kamloops Indian Residential School? The huge media story last summer grew out of the scanning of part of the site in the British Columbia interior where the school operated from 1890 to 1978. The discovery was first reported last May 27 by Tk'emlup's First Nation chief, Rose.
All right, so she's actually reading the Dorchester Review article that I wrote. I talked about this a couple days ago. Holy shit. Okay, this is worse. This is worse than the National Post one. I mean, at least if she'd gone with the National Post, you could say like, well, it is an actual credible Canadian publication. It's a newspaper that is available across the entire country. We've got that. This article was so laughably hilarious. There's a section on it where it talks about China being the greatest human rights violator in history. Oh yeah, here it is. It was certainly ironic that China, of all countries, itself probably the greatest human rights abuser in history, called for the investigation into human rights violation against the Indigenous people of Canada at the UN Human Rights Tribunal of June 2020. Like, we were doing this as a bit a couple days ago, because you're like, this is so laughably fucking wrong. All right, Lauren, glad you found yourself a source. Good research. Good job.
And Kashmir, after an anthropologist, Sarah Belliot, used ground-penetrating radar in a search for the remains of children alleged by some...
No, she didn't write that. The individual Jacques, then she tries to, add to his veracity, as it were, before the article comes out. But no, that wasn't a Lauren Southern article. That was this Jacques individual whose name we cannot pronounce.
To be buried there. She is a young anthropologist, an instructor in anthropology and sociology at the University of...
Jacques Rouillard, by the way, is how you pronounce the last name. It's R-O-U, that means the Rue, and then the R-U-O-I, the Rouillard, so Jacques Rouillard.
Fraser Valley since 2018. I went to UFE. Although it's not a particularly distinguished school, so I do wonder if this is a bit of a academic derogatory.
Again, she was doing this whole thing as like a stream on Twitch. It blows my mind. Like, had you done this with other people, like imagine if someone went on Twitch and was actually doing like a Holocaust denial video or stream where they were pulling up articles and in the middle of that they were like, okay, so this person is saying that apparently the numbers might be inflated. They're talking about Zyklone B be being some weird gas or something. They're really calling into question a lot of these things. I don't know. Like, for me personally, until we have exhumed every single one of the people who died during the Holocaust, I don't know if we can actually say whether or not it actually happened. Like, do you realize on the surface how fucked up that would be if that was a stream on Twitch done by a Twitch streamer, and yet here it is being done to Indigenous people, and it's just completely okay. The entire thing is completely fine.
Remark he's making here. Anyways, her preliminary report is actually based on depressions and abnormalities in the soil of an apple orchard near the school, not exhumed remains. By never pointing out that it is only a matter of speculation or potentiality, and that no remains have yet been found, governments and the media are simply granting credence to what is really a thesis. The thesis of the disappearance of children from residential schools. From an allegation of cultural genocide endorsed by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we have moved to physical genocide, a conclusion that the Commission explicitly rejects in its report. And all of this is based only on soil abnormalities that could easily be
wrong, incorrect, again, lies. The original search was done because the remains of a child had been found. A child's rib bone was found near the apple orchard. That's what provoked this all. Like, you can't keep skipping over that. You can't, on the one hand, like, this is a lie that, again, genocide deniers are going to be doing here. You can't say that this entire thing is fabricated on the idea that there are child's remains under there, but we've never even heard of there being a child's remains because we haven't seen any, so therefore, we cannot claim that these are real. Well, at the same time, we're going to say that this is a hoax until we find the child's remains. And then you're like, they did. This is what provoked the search in the first place. That they've already found the child's remain. Like, okay, so then what more do you want? Again, I'm kind of curious at what level, what grotesque amount of children's bones does Lauren Southern and her ilk need before they take any of this seriously? Like, again, I understand that maybe the concept of the residential school system is brand new to these people. Maybe this is the first time they'd ever heard of it was last year. And so now they're kind of like, well, it seems kind of exaggerated. I don't know. Seems to be a little intense. Like, did we really do that? Did we really take tens of thousands of children from their families and then put them into these institutions where they were tortured? And did the kids really try to run away in some instances and then they froze to death on their way back to their parents? Is that really a true story? Or drowned to death on their way back to their parents? Like, I kind of feel like some of these survivors might be making it up. Again, this is something that is well documented. This is something that thousands and thousands of people have given their testimonies to explain. This is what fucking happened to us. Please listen. Please listen. And now, in addition to that, they're finding children's remains, and they're like, yes, not only did we tell you that was happening, but this is some of the results of what happened. And yet they're still trying to poke holes in the whole story.
Caused by root movements, as the anthropologist
Shad1332 says, the one where the kids froze to death my granny went to? Fuck, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that. But you know what? This is like, honestly, part of this should be a shame on me. I know a lot of people really called into question whether or not it was like a good thing for me to have even entertained Lauren Southern on this topic and talk about it. And in my head, I'm like, well, this is, she's a fucked up white supremacist who's done all these horrible things, but this is going to bring a whole bunch of attention to this topic regardless. There's going to be thousands of searches for residential schools. People will learn about this, but like, I should be taking this from the perspective of like, this person is the opposite of good faith. This person is a professional liar for a living that is engaging in one of the most horrifying things you can do, which is active genocide denial after the fact, even after evidence is presented to them. And someone who actively lies about their own involvement in so many of these other activities on a regular basis. Like, this is what she does for a living. Like, this is not just because she's deeply concerned about this. This here is for fucking fun and profit, which is even, like, more disgusting on top of everything else.
Herself cautioned in a July 15th press conference. Now, these first few paragraphs is all stuff I've reported on already, but this professor takes his analysis further, as the unsubstantiated claim of mass graves is, quite frankly, just a symptom of a larger crisis in Canada, that being the fact that 99% of people who discuss residential schools and Indigenous issues here have not once ever glanced at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Why are you talking
a massive
about that?
Body of work published in 2015 collecting data for...
All right, here comes the research stream. Great. Is this the first time that you've read it? Well, you know what? I'm happy. At least that's something. We have progress. I'm glad that this led you to finally reading it.
Stories, excavations, archaeological information, government files, letters, and professional historical analysis, everything that could possibly be dug up on residential schools, the Catholic Church, the Canadian government, and their relations with the Indigenous community. in one place. Riyard, unlike most people who will probably be offended by his article, has clearly actually read the TRC and has some serious issues with the way that the public and press present its data, stating that potential misreadings of this data may have contributed to the overwhelming unsubstantiated belief that children disappeared into mass graves. So let's unpack that. In its 2015 report, the TRC identified 3,200 deaths of children at residential schools. Surprisingly, it was unable to record the names of 1/3 of the children, or of—
Hold on, did you not read it? Is this going to be a matter of like, oh, at least this person who wrote this article read it, but I am going to show you the covers? Like, did you find the website? I guess there's that.
half the cause of death. According to Volume 4 of the report, there are significant limitations in both the quality and quantity of the data the Commission has been able to compile on residential school deaths. In fact, each trimester, school principals reported the names of students attending school to be funded by the government and specified the names of any students who had died. But in many cases, the report says, school principals simply reported on the number of children who had died in the previous year without identification.
And you know, by the way, and this is one of those other really fucked up things that genocide deniers do, they like to poke holes in the official story. Like, well, was 6 million really the number? Or wasn't it closer? I mean, I've heard reports of some people say it's closer to 4 or 5 million people who died. So, I mean, are we supposed to just take this on face value? I mean, 6 million seems like a very well-rounded number as well. I mean, we can't believe the official data. There were so many things happening back then. It was very complicated. This is also an issue, by the way, of which Indigenous communities have been trying for a long time, and mostly unsuccessfully until very recently, to get information from these schools in relation to the records of the children who attended Like, that was one of the good things that actually came out of all the moral outrage once all these stories started coming out, was that there was a number of schools that were finally like, yes, we are going to release our records to the Indigenous communities so they can try and track down lost relatives and what exactly happened to them. And yes, the record keeping back then is going to be a variety. It's going to be a mix. But there's a huge difference between, we have found cases, and this is the example of cherry picking, we have found instances and cases in which these things do not add up. As this school said that apparently 300 Indigenous kids attended it, but it was actually closer to 250. Yes, you are going to find that. We're talking about old record keeping that was being done in a time before the internet. Amazing. Does that change the overwhelming consensus that these residential schools were institutions that were, again, horrifyingly traumatic to the children who were attending them, that children died at these schools for a variety of reasons, that children tried to run away from these schools and died in the pursuit of seeing their parents again, that children were sexually abused in these schools, thousands of kids were sexually abused by priests when they were children, thousands of kids were beat up when they were kids were electrocuted by a fucking electric chair. Does any of that change? No. So if you're going to do this whole God of gaps thing where it's like, well, I found a couple instances where in this part it kind of seems as if these records don't match up. Seems like the whole story then is fake, right?
Or they might give a total of the number of students who had died since a specific school opened, but with no identification of the name, year, or cause of death. The commission included all these unnamed students in the total of student deaths. That means that student deaths...
The Riyadh article is laughable. At one point he says, agents of the Department of Indian Affairs closely monitoring school operations would have responded quickly to news of any missing or deceased children. Come on, everybody. Let's slow down here, okay? There was something called the Department of Indian Affairs. They would have had oversight over this. If there was any funny business, okay? If kids were getting tortured, if kids were getting sexually molested, they would have been all over that. So clearly, vis-a-vis, ergo, none of this happened. No, the whole story is false.
Could have been counted twice, both in the trimester report by the principal and in the general compilation.
As much as I do love watching Lauren Southern read articles, I'm gonna get to the rest of this. But yeah, so sounds like you want a more thorough investigation. Sounds like you want more records to be released. Sounds like you should be pushing for accountability on the behalf of the Catholic schools that were doing this. And then, let's all fight towards getting more records released so that we can understand very clearly, what took place.
What is this man implying? This is denialism, I tell you, Lauren. I'm sorry, but if you feel that way, you're just stupid. This potential data gap.
Oh, wow. Bodied. Y'all have been owned. Yeah. If you consider any of this to be genocide denial, I'm sorry, but you're a dum-dum. You're low IQ. Yeah, you're just dumb, stupid. That's all there is to this.
Is acknowledged in the TRC, a document compiled by pro-Indigenous experts, bands, and survivors themselves, using all of the available information and millions of dollars of resources. Once again, unlike seemingly every mainstream media source in Canada, this professor actually decided to do the reading and went into the archives surrounding the Kamloops residential school deaths, which brings us to why we may have not seen any exhumation yet and may never. At the Kamloops Residential School, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, NCTR, officially recorded the names of 51 children who died from 1915 to 1964. We have been able to find information on these children from the records in library and...
By the way, just so you understand what the Dorchester Review is like, here's like just a cross-section of the current articles. Stop appeasing the woke jihadis. China's history as destiny. In Kamloops, not one body has been found. That's basically the quality of blog that we're dealing with here.
Archives Canada, and from death certificates held by the British Columbia Archives genealogy resource online, which it seems was not consulted by NCTR researchers. Combining these two sources provides a good picture of the deaths of at least 35 of the 49 students. 2 are duplicates. 17 died in hospital, 8 on their own reserves as a result of illness or accidents, 4 were the subject of autopsies, and 7 of coroner inquests.
By the way, I'm not really familiar with Jacques Liard and his body of work, but like his own Wikipedia article is riddled with the confliction. I can understand why she didn't scroll down when she was reading it, but like they have criticized his articles on Quebec historiography. He links so-called revisionist current in Quebec historiography, accusing it of interpreting French-speaking Quebec as a normal society compared to other North American societies. It would minimize its specific characteristics: conservatism, urbanity, clerical influence, ideological plurality, role of the state, linguistic conflict. He responds to the criticisms in the 2 articles cited above by showing that Quebec has been industrializing and urbanizing at the same pace as Ontario since the beginning of the 20th century, and that Francophones are active in the business world, and that conservative and liberal parties registered their political orientations in liberalism, and that the workers do not lag behind in organizing unions and go on strike. To illustrate the social democratic version that emerges from the demands of international unions to governments, in 2019 he published a volume called The Origins of Social Democracy, the Montreal Trades and Labor Union. So like even within his own field, he's considered controversial.
As for burial sites, 24 are buried in their home Indian Reserve Cemetery and 4 at the Kamloops Indian Reserve Cemetery. For the rest of the 49 children, information is either missing or requires that the complete death certificate in the BC Vital Statistics Agency be consulted. This is a far cry from the unverified claim that authorities overlooked or somehow covered up their deaths, or that the parents were not informed or the remains never returned home. Most were informed, and most were returned home. Significantly, the Kamloops Residential School is located at the heart of the Kamloops Reserve itself, a fact that is never reported by Aboriginal spokespersons or the media. The TRC report states that schools were virtually all church-run in the early years of the system, and Christian burial was the norm at most schools. Also, the adjoining church cemetery may be used as a burial ground for students who die at the school, as well for members of the local community and the missionaries themselves. This is what happened in Kamloops. Our research shows that 4 students are buried in the band cemetery.
So, if I'm to understand this conclusion correctly, is the idea that this happened, but the bodies weren't buried there? Is that the new line we're going? Like, the genocide itself occurred, but not where you think it did.
Cemetery on the reserve that is located near St. Joseph's Church, not far from the residential school. With the cemetery...
Like, all of this hinges on such incredibly spurious allegations. And to be honest, to justify what? To justify that maybe this didn't happen?
So close by, is it really credible that the remains of 200 children were buried clandestinely in a mass grave on the reserve itself without any reaction?
By the way, one of the big problems that, you know, both her and that other individual from Rebel News, when they were making the documentary, have is that when they use mass graves, and you want to get into the the pedantics of what exactly that term means, and even Counterpoint's had a problem with this. He's like, when I think of mass graves, I think of a giant hole dug in the ground, which is the pile of bodies, right? And then when we were looking at the actual definition, including the one that she used from the United Nations, first off, in academia, it's not something that is directly agreed upon, as in like every single person who researches this has the same textbook definition of what exactly constitutes a mass grave, but 2 or more bodies that are buried in close proximity to each other that have died, and then they go on for the multitude of reasons. So that would go on to ask the next question. If the term mass graves is what's so deeply upsetting to Lauren, because she thinks it just provokes and instigates a whole bunch of people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do because they're so mad about this, like how could this have fucking happened? And not any of the things that led exactly to the children dying, which is the stuff that we have very, very good documentation for. That's what really, really fucks me up about all this, is that like when it comes to the treatment of Indigenous people in the residential schools, we're well versed as to what was happening to them. Again, we have thousands of testimonies of children who were sexually abused, thousands of testimonies of children who were beaten, who were forced to do things against their will that they would not have wanted to do otherwise, who were even tortured. We know all of this. So if you don't want to accept any of that as fact, which would be utterly absurd because you're just basically saying that the people who lived through it are all lying, but if you don't want to accept any of that as fact, what is really upsetting to you is the technicality as to whether or not they were buried in close enough proximity to each other. And to that I would ask, how close, Lauren? How close do you need? Like, how many bodies, first off, and how close would you need for this to be okay in your books? Like, if they're a half a meter away, is that okay? If there's 3 children buried within like a meter and a half apart from each other, is that appropriate for you? Like, at what point does, like, you understand how ghoulish this line of justification becomes? Because ultimately, if you're trying to disprove this entire thing as being a hoax, and all you have to like hinge on is like, well, according to some old documents, these numbers may have not been as accurate as we are portraying, and based on what we're seeing here, I don't have any evidence to show that these could even contain bodies. We don't even know if there's bodies underneath there. There's been absolutely 0 child remains produced, even though it was child remains that led to the search in the first place.
Action from the Band Council until last summer, Chief Casimir states that the presence of children's remains had been known in the community for a long time. Aboriginal families are certainly as concerned about the fate of their children as any other community. Why did they say nothing? Moreover, how can one think that entire groups of religious men and women dedicated to high moral standards could conspire to commit such sordid crimes without dissent and not even a single...
So this is it. This is, again, and this is classic genocide denial. How can one think that an entire group of religious men and women, how could these amazing priests and nuns have committed such an atrocity if not a single person came out to speak out about it? Multiple people have, first off. That's just okay. But, like, again, that's your metric? That's, like, why didn't a single one of the guards working at Auschwitz say anything or stop it? Like, why didn't they do anything about it, you know? And if they had, then maybe I'd believe the official story a little bit more. Like, why wasn't there a single whistleblower to come forward? You know, why doesn't anyone talk about this? That's unbelievable. You are basing this all on like this in terms of like evidence that you're presenting on the other act, because you're making, in my opinion, incredibly serious claims. By the way, doing them live on Twitch. Hi, Twitch. This is happening live on your platform, by the way. So doing this shit live on Twitch, which, by the way, had she been doing this for fucking, again, Holocaust denial, this would be seen as just beyond the pale, all right? You would not be allowed to do that. But anyways, doing this live on Twitch, and the evidence you're presenting is all subjective, right? It's like, well, I mean, if this happened, why didn't anyone say anything about it? I mean, if this happened, then why don't we have direct evidence of a child's cadaver that has marks of torture on it? Well, if this happened, then why not blank? This isn't real, you know? This is all circumstantial.
Riard goes on to make many points I made in my film, The Canadian Mass Graves Hoax, like highlighting how the Cowessess site of allegedly 751 unmarked children's graves was actually just a Catholic cemetery of the Mission in Maryville. He discusses how wooden graves were used by both First Nations communities and also poor Catholics, white...
Yes, and again, I pointed out that the fact that she conflates the two as being the exact same, that this one considers, is like no one said this was a mass grave, not even in the article. When you keep using this thing as if like, people keep saying mass graves, and I was like, no, this one didn't. They never used the term mass grave.
Burials and missing graves. For example, the cemetery at the Roman Catholic St. Mary's Mission near Mission, British Columbia. been months.
Okay, so she did this all as a stream as well yesterday. Not the research stuff you're seeing before. That was a separate stream that she'd done. But I was going to play the stream she did, because in that stream, a couple things happened, but now it's just going to be a he said, she said, because she's deleted it. She deletes all her VODs, and I guess I understand why now, because she does and riddles them with stuff that is definitely against TOS. I mean, I can pull up the Twitch terms of service, but this shit is like, it should be beyond the pale. It's pretty easy. There's one thing if you want to say, hey, by the way, I would like to you know, do some research into this for a variety of reasons, to something that is this traumatic, to something that is this horrifying. Your angle would have to be one of, like, in order to help further people's understanding of this issue, in order to be like, hey, by the way, I want to help so that more people understand the crimes and atrocities that were committed against Indigenous people. That's why I want to do this. To come at it from the angle that Lauren does, in that I want to disprove this. I don't have a lot of, you know, tangible evidence, but I want to disprove this with a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence, as in, like, why weren't there whistleblowers? Why didn't anyone do anything? I mean, if these bad things were happening, why didn't anyone stop it? You would think if things this bad, like child torture and child sexual abuse were occurring, someone would stop it. I mean, does anyone stop it in the modern day Catholic Church right now? Has that problem solved itself? Is sexual abuse of children not so rampant in the Catholic Church that there are, like, reports coming out of, like, tens of thousands of kids getting molested in certain areas? Like, if the defense is just, well, someone would have stopped it. If this was true, someone would have said something. Someone would have done something, right?
It is not out of the ordinary for historical grave sites, whether they be for white or Indigenous people, to go missing. In fact, this whole planet is one giant mass of unmarked graves. And until there is any archaeological investigation of
Canada
the circumstances, any proof of exhumation or identification, none of the claims the media have been making should have been made. And every month...
Wait. Hey, do you not understand what you're doing right here? Because you're doing the thing you're trying to call out. You're doing the exact thing. If you want to claim the whole thing is a hoax, which is fucked up, don't you have to wait, Lauren? Don't you have to wait? Because right now, all you're basing that on is circumstantial evidence. That's it. You're doing the same thing, except you're doing it in the direction of genocide denial.
That goes by without any evidence is further vindication of those of us who remain skeptical.
Oh, I didn't mean to zoom in.
Wild.
Sorry. But hey, any evidence? What about the child's rib bone? When is she ever going to mention that? I love how she keeps saying, like, there's been zero evidence whatsoever outside of ground-penetrating radar, of which we know cannot find bodies. So why exactly is anyone saying that a single child has been found? They found the child's rib bone. Holy shit, that's what provoked the investigation. So until you either, like, do you just ignore that? Are you just like, well, that never happened? It's just a mystery, you know? Who will ever say? But if that alone isn't enough for you, then why not wait? Why not wait? Because everything you're doing in the interim is fucked up.
How people have
on Twitch, by the way.
Story. I got cancelled from speaking at a top university in Canada by both students and staff, an institution that is supposed to be dedicated to finding truth and observing actual data, for making the exact same analysis that the TRC...
Why won't they platform the genocide deniers? I mean, come on, the official numbers can't be right.
...itself made. That the actual data states, that the actual woman who conducted the GPR test states. And now, what this professor...
No, because, again, you're denying one of the most important parts of the story. If you ignore the fact that they actually already found children's remains, then the rest of this, everything you've just said, falls apart. And then all you're left with is you just standing there doing genocide denial. So, yeah, that's a bad look. I would say that's a very, very bad look, Lauren.
...of history is highlighting. And you know, I read my comments and I see people in there who have been affected by this issue. I see the Indigenous people who make comments saying, yeah, residential schools were a mess. It is a tragedy what happened to my people. So don't make it a damn circus.
Holy fuck.
You don't need to lie to talk about our history.
Fuck.
And I respect that attitude so much.
Holy fuck.
I will just end with this.
Are you not going to show it? Oh, yeah, maybe because that fucking is just a made-up thing. But anyways, yeah, okay. I like it. Now she's become the Lorax of Indigenous people. All right, she speaks for Indigenous people, for they cannot speak for themselves. But she reads a lot of the comments in which people are like, oh, thank you for speaking truth to power, Lauren. Yeah, it's really sad when people, try to make or profit off an immense tragedy that affected me. Yes, thank you, Lauren. That's definitely real comments that are appearing.
Last quote from Rouillard's piece, which I will also link in the description down below because the full thing is excellent.
No. And you know what? I get the final word because this is my show right now, so I'm not going to show any more of this bigotry. But holy fuck. I mean, first off, if you all didn't know this, and I say this as an olive branch to people who still think it's completely fine to parade around Lauren Southern as this new centrist conservative figure. Like, that's totally fine. She has been lying to every single one of you. She lies. She's a professional liar. That's what she does. She tries to make what she considers to be documentaries and then just distorts the truth to the point of being completely falsifiable. She also lies about her own involvement in things. She's never once talked to anyone about her involvement with Martin Sellner. She's never once expressed how she had made multiple videos on the Great Replacement Theory, including with Martin Sellner, many of which are still available on Rebel News. She'll like to tell everybody, hey, the idea of me inspiring the Christchurch shooter has no basis in reality, because my video on the Great Replacement that I made, came out months before the official report said he was radicalized. And I'm going to ignore all the other videos that I made where I talk about the Great Replacement Theory with, again, Martin Sellner. Martin Sellner, one of the people who received a sizable amount of contribution from the Christchurch shooter. Yes, the very same. And also I toured with Stefan Molyneux, another person who received money from the Christchurch shooter. Oh, and also Rebel Media also received money from the Christchurch shooter. Again, things I'm never going to acknowledge or bring up or talk about because I'm a professional liar, and I want you all to enjoy this rebranding that I'm doing right now as a centrist. I'm just a perfect conservative centrist and a prominent right-wing figure that you can all talk about. That's basically it. I would encourage everybody to watch the videos by Lonerbox that completely debunk her whole I wasn't actually involved in firing flares at immigrants, or the video by Hates Vadim that completely debunks her whole, like, I have absolutely zero involvement with inspiring the Christchurch shooter because I'm not mentioned in the official report, even though there are other reports that do in fact mention her, and anything else that she wants to lie about professionally, because that's, again, what she does. What is actually fucked up in the interim, though, is that she's continuing to do these streams on Twitch, and no one's batting an eye. It seems like, this would be something that would be very easily identifiable as fucked up. I don't know what the technical term is in the terms of service, but I'm pretty sure engaging in genocide denial is directly in there. You know what? Maybe I should pull that up. Oh, what's this? In the terms of service, mocking the events and victims or denying the occurrence of well-documented hate crimes or denying the existence of documented acts of mass murder or genocide against a protected group. Drawing a cartoon mocking the victims of a hate crime, denial of the existence of a genocide, including the Holocaust, suggesting a documented act of mass murder motivated by a protected characteristic was a hoax. Wow. Seems pretty well laid out there. Seems pretty self-evident. I mean, it's tough because, again, she deletes all these VODs right after she does them, probably for self-apparent reasons, but there you have it. I mean, if it was the terms of hateful conduct, it's pretty self-evident right there. The NCTR signs agreement with Ottawa to receive more residential school records. Canada's Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller says Ottawa has reached an agreement with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation to hand over more records on residential schools that Ottawa had been holding back. We will continue to support the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation as they move forward with the critical work of preserving the historical records of residential schools and the impact on the Indigenous peoples for future generations. We are committed to rebuilding trust and strengthening our relationship with Indigenous people by taking steps like these that support survivors, their families, and communities in the efforts to heal, as well as work towards closure and accountability. This came out, I believe, on the 20th of January, so brand new. Yes, it's great. Ottawa is receiving more records from residential schools. The same thing that Lauren Southern is complaining about is actually happening. So, it's not as if this is something that, residential schools have, it's not a matter of public record where it's like, oh, we had no idea. These records are spurious. It's like they have been fighting to get more records in the hands of people so that we can do more research into this. So yes, this is an ongoing thing. Fraser Institute fellow Tom Flanagan, news stories about residential school graves are fake news. This is the worst case of fake news in Canadian history. Tom Flanagan, former senior advisor to Stephen Harper, wow, and current senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, says he thinks news reports over 1,000 unmarked graves at the sites of former residential schools is fake news. This is the worst case of fake news in Canadian history. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission estimated between 4,000 and 6,000 children died in residential schools. Causes of death include physical abuse, malnutrition, disease, and neglect. Others died by suicide or by trying to escape the schools. This past summer, hundreds of remains were discovered at unmarked grave sites in the former Kamloops residential school. Local authorities say they belonged, in some cases, to children as young as 3. Weeks later, another 751 grave sites were found near the former Marieville Indian School in Saskatchewan. But in an interview last week, the far right website True North, Flanagan cast doubts on these reports. So if you're just wondering what the ilk is, this is the same kind of people that Lauren Southern is kind of palling around with. I haven't heard of anyone say that there would be a practical alternative to residential schools. Would you say no school at all? If we hadn't set up schools in Canada, would we be condemned today for leaving this population in ignorance? So, the torture centers that we invented where they were sexually molested, would you rather there have been no torture sexual molestation centers at all? Would that have been a better course of action? Okay. I think any honest approach would try to draw a balance, Flanagan told the True North. What happened is when people with strong ideological convictions, what today is often called wokeism, have taken part in bad reports and woven them into a narrative while discounting the numerous good reports. The good things that happened at the residential schools. Let us not forget, the historical record is mixed as far as with all human institutions. You know, if I can draw a comparison for a second, if you look at the literature surrounding boarding schools in England, at the time they were used for children of elite parents, many schools that love their schools, others report horrifying reports of physical and sexual abuse at these schools. So for residential schools in Canada, you will find a mixed set of reports. Yes, but again, these were both implemented by the Catholic Church and the Canadian government at the time. Children did not have a choice about whether or not they attended these schools. It's to draw a comparison to many institutions, for one reason or another, have mixed results. These were people who were forced into doing this. The parents of these kids had their children taken away from them forcibly by the RCMP. And then if the kids died in these schools, that would be upon the schools themselves. They were under their stewardship. Can you understand how incredibly fucked up this entire concept is? To try and whitewash the entire thing after the fact is so incredibly ghoulish. Sorry, I just want to check this article you sent me. Hold on one sec. Lawyer pulls out the stops to discredit crowned expert. Thomas Flanagan, a former policy advisor to the Reform Party and author of First Nations, Second Thoughts, the Donor Prize-winning book that is critical of what the author calls Aboriginal orthodoxy, is seen by many First Nation leaders as an arch political foe. He was subjected to 5 grilling days of cross-examination in federal court in Calgary in his role as an expert witness called by the Crown in a $1.5 billion lawsuit brought by the Samson Cree and Amiskun Cree Nations. Ed Molstad, the lawyer of the Samson Cree, told the publication that his approach with this witness was more detailed than usual. The 2 Alberta bands instructed their lawyers to argue that Flanagan was not an expert on matters related to their actions against the Crown, as they seek legal rulings on a number of issues, including oil and gas revenues. They also claim that Flanagan has a bias that renders his opinions of little use to the court. His credibility was challenged on dozens of fronts. He was put forth by the federal Crown as an expert who is qualified to rebut reports submitted as evidence by academics in the employment of the band. The case for the bar is Victor Buffalo versus the Crown, a claim for allegedly unpaid oil and gas royalties. The examination of the witness began in early January, but was interrupted when the judge became ill. Court resumed May 6th with a procedural matter, and Flanagan returned to the witness stand on May 8th. Early on, Molstad attempted to impeach the witness's credibility by suggesting he had taken information from other academics' work and was not properly footnoted in it. The lawyer used the word plagiarism and drew a sharp denial from Flanagan. When court resumed in May, Molstad attempted to introduce criticisms of the professor's research methods by reading critical reports authored by academics. Judge Teitelbaum ruled that Molstad should call the academics as witnesses if he wished to use their words to discredit Flanagan. This forced the rule that a lawyer change his tactics to focus on Flanagan's book, First Nations, Second Thoughts. The lawyer appeared to score points by dissecting one passage in the book. In a section detailing with the Samson Cree Nation, Flanagan wrote, "The band members, especially young people, use their share of oil and gas royalties to buy high-powered trucks. Too many drive them too fast, too often under the influence of alcohol and other drugs. It's the worst kind of stereotype because a true one." Molstad said, "I put this to you, sir, that the statement is slanderous racist statement against the Samson Cree people." Flanagan said he disagreed. When he asked what sources he relied on to substantiate the things he wrote as facts in the passage, Flanagan said he needed to check his records. The next day he returned to court and said the sources were a couple of newspaper stories. One of the stories was about an attempt, later abandoned, by an automobile insurance company to stop providing insurance to drivers in the area code that includes Samson Cree Nation because that area had an unusually high number of motor vehicle accidents. The professor admitted the passage did not reflect good academic research methodology. "I would say those sentences also contain a certain amount of inference, he testified, and having a chance to reflect upon it, I would say that I probably shouldn't have written those sentences the way I did." Molstad continued the offensive. "They're not true, are they?" he asked. "They're a mixture of truth and hypothesis, and they should have been better written to distinguish what is demonstrably true and what is hypothesis that requires further testing," Flanagan replied. The judge, as he rarely did during the examination, interjected with a question of his own. "And when you read the newspaper article, did you check to see if the newspaper article was correct? That what he stated in the newspaper article was a fact that you now quote as a fact, or did you just take it as a given? And is that how you do your work generally? Do you take what is given as stated in the newspaper?" the judge asked. Flanagan said that's not how he usually worked. Molstad said he had to point out that a source material where it said that Samson members drive their vehicles under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Flanagan admitted it wasn't there. "I wish I had written those sentences to make clear the difference between reported facts and inferences," he said. Later, Molstad pointed out the error in the source material that Flanagan had quoted in another book. Flanagan had not detected an error, and it was made his way into his work. Once again, the judge questioned the witness. "Do you not proofread what you write?" he asked. Flanagan said he did, but his errors slipped through. Clark Hunter, the lawyer representing the federal crown, agreed that Flanagan had been given a rougher ride than most expert witnesses. I would say it was a lot more extensive than what you would usually see, but he stood up pretty well, I thought. Samson members were upset that the crown could call an Alliance Party member as an expert witness in a case involving First Nation matters. A couple of points, Hunter said when he asked about the issue. "We're not calling him as an expert to speak about policy issues, we're calling him to speak about an expert about history." Most had spent 6 hours in court time in January narrowing down the areas where Flanagan claims to have expertise in Native issues, getting him to admit that he has never done any research on reserve and has never spent any time working directly with Native people. Flanagan, who holds a PhD in political science from Duke University in North Carolina, also admitted he has never taken a single course in Canadian history or Canadian Aboriginal history. The second point is at the time he retained and prepared his report, he had no involvement with the Canadian Alliance at that point. He had some involvement with the Reform Party, but he had quit and was only in light of Stephen Harper's involvement that he had involved himself in politics. When we originally retained him, he would have expected his evidence would have been heard a long time ago. He wrote the report in 1997 and in early 98, and then for a variety of reasons, it's taken so long to get where we are. Asked if it was fair that the Crown knew that Flanagan's interpretation of the events would be affected by his alliance point of view, and thus the Crown to federal government was espousing a point of view that it claimed not to embrace in order to win the lawsuit, Hunter said no. I guess the question is, everyone starts from somewhere, but what you hope is that you believe that Dr. Flanagan is capable of doing what he has done is to look at things objectively. He said, "When you're under oath and you're on stand to testify as an expert witness on matters of history, you have to express your opinion and call it a way to see based on objective evidence." We believe that's what he's doing. Of course, everybody comes off a certain place. Dr. Flanagan would like to acknowledge that. So do the experts called by the plaintiff. All the experts called by the plaintiff have testified, if they've testified at all, only for Aboriginal interests. Samson members also say that Flanagan's evidence in the recent Bonoi Treaty 8 tax exemption case was given no weight by the judge. They see this very cynical move by the Crown to call him as a witness again. Again, we detailed Dr. Flanagan in 1998. The Benoit decision is very recent. It's under appeal. We don't know what it will see if they ultimately taken off Dr. Flanagan's evidence. We don't think it's quite fair to say Dr. Flanagan's views were given no weight. On matters of history, the judge quoted him for saying certain things, but the judge's interpretation was that the element of legal argumentation in Dr. Flanagan's report and by the judge disagreed with what the aspect of it is. But if you read the judgment, you'll see that some of the matters of pure history, what happened with the judge cites, relies upon Dr. Flanagan's report.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we beseech thee to smite down our enemies. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble court jesters, here to amuse you. To our lords, Trevor R., we give thanks for this spit of land for us to eke out this meager existence. To our knights, Merid, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Ellie Leslie, Alex P., Brandon, Words Greenwood, Nate, that one guy, Hagbird Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multi Mondi, Trevor Yanis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Cern 42, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Nkosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our flag in a veil, and we salute you, our friends.